My parents gave my inheritance to my child brother when I paid their bills, so I cut contact one in court and never looked back. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I was the easy one in my family. That's what my parents called it: easy, low maintenance, dependable. It sounded like praise, but it really meant I was the child who didn't get to need anything. I learned early that if I stayed quiet and useful, things went smoother. The house felt calmer when I didn't ask questions or complain, so I stopped doing both. My younger brother was the opposite. He was treated like he might shatter if the world pressed too hard on him. Every mistake he made came with an explanation, a reason, a soft landing. If he forgot something, my mom would sigh and say, "He's sensitive, you know that." If I messed up, my dad would just look at me and say, "I expected better from you." That sentence followed me everywhere. By the time I was a teenager, my parents leaned on me like I was an extra adult in the house. I ran errands, handled phone calls, helped manage bills I barely understood. When my mom was overwhelmed, she vented to me late at night at the kitchen table, the light buzzing overhead, her coffee going cold while I nodded and listened. "You're the only one I can talk to," she'd say, and I felt proud and trapped at the same time. Praise came, but it was conditional. "We don't worry about you," they'd say, as if that was a compliment. Meanwhile, my brother's failures were treated like storms that needed shelter. I told myself this was just how families worked. Someone had to be strong so others could fall apart safely. I internalized it completely. I believed sacrifice was the cost of belonging, that loyalty would eventually balance the scales. If I just kept showing up, kept giving, kept being responsible, one day it would finally count. And at the time, I truly believed that day was coming. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was small things, covering a utility bill because my parents were short this month, grabbing groceries on my way home from work, paying a phone bill so it wouldn't get shut off. Every request came wrapped in reassurance. "It's temporary," my dad would say, tapping the table like he was making a promise. "We'll pay you back." I never asked when. Once I started working full-time, the expectations quietly shifted. The calls came more often, always framed as emergencies. A medical copay here. A late notice there. My mom would sound stressed, her voice tight, telling me how embarrassing it felt to even ask. "I hate bothering you," she'd say, which somehow made saying no feel cruel. So I didn't. I transferred the money and told myself it was just being a good son. What bothered me was the contrast. While I was juggling their expenses, my younger brother never seemed to worry about money at all. He upgraded his phone. Bought new clothes. Went out with friends like nothing in the world touched him. When I asked how he could afford it, my parents brushed it off. "We don't want him stressed," my mom said once, as if stress was something assigned, not shared. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, bank app open, doing mental math instead of sleeping. My room was quiet except for the hum of my laptop fan, and I felt this strange mix of pride and resentment. Pride because they trusted me. Resentment because no one ever asked how I was holding up. When I mentioned feeling stretched, my dad laughed lightly and said, "You're good with money. You'll figure it out." I kept paying. Month after month. They stopped thanking me and started expecting it. If I hesitated, even for a second, the disappointment was immediate. "We thought we could count on you," my mom said once, and that single sentence crushed me more than any bill. Still, I believed them. I believed this was temporary, that this responsibility meant something deeper. I didn't realize then that what I was funding wasn't just their lifestyle, but a future I might not be included in. They didn't talk about the future often, but when they did, it was always vague and reassuring in a way that kept me compliant. My parents would mention it casually, usually during quiet moments, like it was something I didn't need to worry about. "Everything will be handled fairly one day," my dad said once while flipping through paperwork at the dining table. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I clung to the word fairly like it meant something solid. My mom was subtler. When I'd stress about money or mention how much I was sending them every month, she'd sigh and say, "You know this won't be for nothing." Sometimes she'd add, "You'll be taken care of," in that soft, maternal tone that made it feel like a promise instead of a calculation. I never asked for details. Asking felt greedy, like I was cheapening whatever trust still existed between us. Those moments kept me going. They helped me justify the imbalance. I told myself my brother needed help now, but things would even out later. He was still finding himself, still fragile, still protected. I was already stable, already strong. That was the story I repeated in my head whenever resentment bubbled up. Delayed fairness still felt like fairness if you believed in it hard enough. I remember one night after dinner, my parents and I sitting in the living room, the TV muted, paperwork spread across the coffee table. My dad casually mentioned the house and how both kids would be considered. My heart actually lifted. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd heard in years. I nodded, pretending not to care, but inside I felt seen for the first time in a long while. After that, I doubled down. I paid bills faster. I stopped tracking how much I'd already given. I thought patience was an investment. I thought loyalty had interest. I didn't notice how carefully they avoided specifics. How quickly conversations ended if I asked follow-up questions. How my brother suddenly knew more about family plans than I did. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. But looking back, that was when the silence started feeling intentional. The first thing I noticed was how careful my parents became with their words. Conversations that used to flow easily started feeling edited, like they were choosing each sentence in real time. If I asked how things were going financially, my dad would shrug and say, "We're managing," then immediately change the subject. My mom started answering questions with questions, asking about my job or my schedule instead of giving real answers. Then there were the small details that didn't add up. My brother showed up one weekend with a newer car than I knew he could afford, talking excitedly about good timing and family help. When I asked what he meant, he laughed and said, "You know how mom and dad are," like that explained everything. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile and let it go. I started noticing paperwork disappearing from places it used to sit openly. Files that once lived in the hallway cabinet were suddenly locked away. When I asked where something went, my mom stiffened and said, "Why do you need to know?" Her tone wasn't angry, it was defensive. That hurt more than yelling would have. It made me feel like an outsider in my own family. One evening, I tried to have a calm conversation. I sat at the kitchen table while my dad stood by the sink, arms crossed. "I just want to understand what's going on," I said carefully. He sighed and replied, "You're reading too much into things." My mom nodded along, adding, "You've always been sensitive about fairness." That word, sensitive, felt like a dismissal, not a description. After that, I started questioning myself instead of them. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe stress was making me paranoid. I'd always been the dependable one, why would they shut me out now? So I pushed the discomfort down and kept paying, kept helping, kept acting like nothing had changed. But the house felt colder. Conversations ended faster when I walked into a room. My brother stopped talking to me about money altogether. It was subtle, but it was there, a shift in energy that told me I was no longer part of certain discussions. I didn't know what they were hiding yet. I only knew that whatever it was, it didn't include me. I didn't find out the truth because they decided to be honest. I found out because they got careless. One afternoon, I stopped by their house earlier than planned to drop off groceries. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're intruding even when you're not. On the dining table, spread out in neat stacks, were documents I recognized immediately: property papers, bank statements, legal-looking forms with highlighted sections. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But my name wasn't anywhere on those pages. My brother's was. Over and over again. Beneficiary. Primary recipient. Sole transfer. My chest tightened as I flipped one page, then another, my hands starting to shake. This wasn't future planning. This had already been done. When my mom walked in and saw me standing there, her face went pale. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said, not angry, afraid. My dad followed her in, took one look at the papers in my hands, and sighed like he'd been caught leaving dishes in the sink. No apology. No explanation. Just exhaustion. "So it's true," I said quietly. My voice didn't even sound like mine. "You already gave it to him." My dad rubbed his temples. "We did what we thought was best." My mom stepped forward, hands raised like I was the one being unreasonable. "Your brother needs security," she said. "You're stable. You'll be fine." I laughed, but it came out wrong, sharp and hollow. "I paid your bills," I said. "I kept this house running. I believed you when you said things would be fair." My brother showed up halfway through, drawn in by the tension. He didn't look surprised. That hurt more than anything else. He avoided my eyes and muttered, "I didn't think it mattered." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a clean snap. Years of loyalty collapsed into a single, devastating realization: they had already chosen. And they never planned to tell me. I thought once the truth was out, the worst part would be over. I believed there would be shame, maybe even remorse. Instead, what came next was something colder. Calculated. They didn't deny what they'd done, they reframed it. Within minutes, the conversation shifted from what happened to what was wrong with me. "You're focusing on money instead of family," my mom said, her voice trembling like she was the injured one. She sat down heavily at the table, pressing a hand to her chest. "After everything we've been through." My dad nodded along, arms crossed again, staring at me like I'd failed some invisible test. "You're acting entitled," he added. "That's not how we raised you." I stood there, stunned, trying to process how quickly the narrative flipped. "I never asked for more," I said. "I just asked for honesty." My brother finally spoke up then, leaning against the doorway, avoiding my eyes. "You always make things dramatic," he muttered. "Mom and Dad were just trying to protect me." Protect. That word hit me like a slap. I had protected them for years, financially, emotionally, quietly. But suddenly, I was selfish for wanting fairness. My mom looked at me and said, "We thought you were stronger than this." I felt my stomach drop. Strength, in their language, meant silence. They started rewriting history right in front of me. My dad claimed they never promised anything. My mom said my help was appreciated but not required. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears as they dismantled years of conversations, turning them into misunderstandings and exaggerations. I began doubting my own memory. When I tried to leave, my mom blocked the doorway. "Don't do this," she whispered. "You'll tear the family apart." The guilt wrapped around me instantly, heavy and familiar. I left anyway, my hands shaking as I unlocked my car. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed everything over and over, wondering how I went from dependable to disposable in a single afternoon. And what scared me most wasn't what they did, it was how easily they justified it. Because if they could erase my sacrifices that fast, I started to wonder what else they were capable of. After that confrontation, I expected distance. Maybe silence. What I didn't expect was how quickly they acted like nothing had changed. 2 days later, my mom called like she always did, her voice overly casual. "The electric bill is due," she said. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just expectation. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall of my apartment. "I can't keep paying," I said carefully. The line went quiet for a second before she exhaled sharply. "So you're really doing this," she replied. "After everything we've sacrificed for you." The words hit with practiced precision. Sacrifice. Guilt. Obligation. They knew exactly which buttons to press. My dad followed up with a text later that night. "We're disappointed. We raised you better than this." I read it over and over, my chest tight, my hands sweating. They weren't asking anymore, they were testing how far they could still push me. And the worst part was how effective it was. I felt sick with guilt even though I knew I was being used. Meanwhile, my brother stayed silent. No calls. No messages. Just distance. But I saw him post photos online, new furniture, weekend trips, dinners out. Things I knew my parents couldn't afford on their own. It felt like watching someone spend money directly out of my account, except I wasn't even part of the conversation anymore. I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, replaying old moments where I could have said no sooner. I felt trapped between who I'd always been and who I was trying to become. Every boundary I imagined setting felt like betrayal. When I finally told my mom I wouldn't send money that month, she cried. Not quietly, loudly. "I don't know how we'll survive," she said. "I hope you can live with that." I hung up shaking, guilt clawing at my throat. That was when it hit me. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource. And once I stopped being useful, I could already feel myself being pushed out. The breaking point came faster than I expected. I didn't announce it or make a speech, I just stopped sending money. No warning. No explanation. I told myself I needed to see what would happen if I finally chose myself. What happened was worse than silence. My dad called first. He didn't yell. That almost hurt more. "So that's it," he said flatly. "You're really turning your back on us." I tried to explain that I needed space, that I couldn't keep being the financial safety net after everything I'd learned. He cut me off. "You've changed," he said. "And not for the better." Then my mom called. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "We don't recognize you anymore," she sobbed. "You used to be such a good son." That sentence broke something inside me. Used to be. Like all my years of sacrifice had an expiration date. Like the moment I stopped paying, my value disappeared. Family gatherings stopped including me. I found out through social media, photos of birthdays, dinners, holidays I hadn't even been told about. My brother stood front and center in every picture, smiling, arm around my parents like nothing had ever been wrong. No one checked on me. No one asked how I was doing. It was like I'd been erased. I remember sitting alone in my apartment one night, lights off, phone face down on the table. The silence felt loud, pressing in on me. I felt stupid for believing loyalty meant protection. I replayed every moment I'd stayed quiet, every bill I'd paid, every time I chose them over myself. And for the first time, I wondered if I had ever really been loved, or just tolerated because I was useful. I cried harder than I ever had. Not dramatic sobs, quiet, exhausted ones that left my chest aching. I felt abandoned, ashamed, disposable. I had given them everything, and when I finally said no, I lost my family overnight. That was my lowest point. And sitting there in the dark, I realized something terrifying and clarifying at the same time: if I didn't stand up for myself now, I never would. The days after that felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. I went to work, answered emails, nodded through conversations, but inside I was hollow. The silence from my family was complete. No calls. No messages. It hurt more than the arguments ever had. But in that quiet, something unexpected happened. I started thinking clearly for the first time. Without their voices in my head, I began replaying everything with a different lens. Not as the good son, not as the responsible one, but as someone who had been systematically used. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that what they did wasn't just cruel, it might not have been legal. That thought scared me. It also gave me a strange sense of control. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was doing. I made an appointment with a lawyer during my lunch break, my hands sweating as I filled out the intake form. Sitting in that office, surrounded by neutral walls and the soft hum of air conditioning, I felt small and exposed. When I started explaining everything, payments, promises, documents, the lawyer didn't interrupt. She just listened, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You may have more rights here than you think." That sentence hit me harder than any accusation my parents had thrown at me. For years, I'd been told I was asking for too much. Now someone was telling me I hadn't asked for enough. She explained things slowly, carefully, outlining options I didn't know existed. I felt sick thinking about how deliberate my parents' actions had been. This wasn't an oversight. It was a plan. Walking back to my car afterward, the sky heavy and gray, I realized I was afraid, but not of them anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if I backed down again. Afraid of betraying myself the way I always had. That was the moment I chose self-preservation over loyalty. And once that choice was made, there was no going back. I didn't warn them before taking legal action. Part of me still hoped they'd reach out, admit what they did, or at least try to talk. Instead, the first time they heard from me in weeks was through paperwork. A formal notice. Black and white. Impossible to gaslight away. My mom called immediately. This time, there were no tears, just anger. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded. I could hear my dad in the background, pacing. "We're your parents," he shouted. "You don't sue family." My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady when I said, "You shouldn't steal from your child." The line went dead after that. The process was slow and exhausting. Every document I submitted felt like reopening an old wound. Bank transfers. Messages. Dates. Amounts. Seeing everything laid out chronologically made my stomach turn. Years of money flowing one direction. Promises made, then quietly erased. It wasn't emotional anymore, it was factual. And that scared them. During mediation, my parents finally dropped the act. My dad accused me of being ungrateful. My mom claimed I was being manipulated by outsiders. My brother sat beside them, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. When the mediator asked him a direct question, he hesitated, and that hesitation said more than words ever could. The courtroom itself felt sterile and cold. Hard benches. Fluorescent lights. I remember gripping my hands together, nails digging into my palms, trying not to look at my parents. When the judge asked questions, the answers were simple. Clear. Documented. No emotions. No rewriting history. For the first time, their version of events didn't matter. The truth did. When the ruling came, I felt numb before I felt relieved. The decision was in my favor. Assets restored. Actions acknowledged. Accountability, finally, on record. But as I looked over at my parents, their faces tight with shock and resentment, I realized winning hadn't brought closure yet. Because legal justice was only one part of what I needed. And the hardest decision was still ahead. Winning in court didn't feel like victory the way I imagined it would. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. Mostly, I felt tired. Drained in a way sleep couldn't fix. The judgment was final, the facts undeniable, yet my parents still tried to reach me like nothing fundamental had changed. My mom sent long messages late at night. Not apologies, explanations. She wrote about how hard it was to be a parent, how they were under pressure, how I should understand that mistakes happen. My dad's messages were shorter and colder. "We didn't raise you to air family business," he wrote. "This didn't need to go this far. Not once did either of them say they were sorry for lying to me. My brother finally reached out too. He called, voice tense, saying, "You really blew everything up." He talked about how awkward things were now, how our parents were stressed, how I'd made holidays uncomfortable. I listened in silence, waiting for him to acknowledge what he'd taken. He never did. The call ended with him saying, "I hope it was worth it." That was the moment it clicked. Even after consequences, they still saw themselves as victims. The court ruling hadn't changed how they viewed me, it had just made me harder to control. I realized that if I stayed in contact, I'd be pulled back into the same cycle, just with new tactics. So I stopped responding. One by one, I muted numbers. Archived emails. Removed myself from family group chats I wasn't really part of anyway. The quiet afterward was heavy, almost painful. There was grief in it. Not just for the family I lost, but for the family I thought I had. I mourned the version of my parents who would have chosen honesty. I mourned the brother who might have stood beside me. And I mourned the younger version of myself who believed love had to be earned. Cutting contact wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace, not punishment. I just didn't know yet how much my life was about to change without them in it. Life didn't magically get better the moment I cut contact, but it got quieter, and that mattered more than I expected. The constant anxiety, the waiting for the next guilt-filled call or passive-aggressive message, slowly faded. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I stopped bracing myself for disappointment. For the first time, my life felt like it actually belonged to me. With distance, I started rebuilding things I didn't even realize had been damaged. My finances stabilized once I wasn't funneling money into a black hole of obligation. I slept better. Ate better. Thought more clearly. Therapy helped me put words to things I'd normalized for years: parentification, conditional love, emotional manipulation. Hearing those patterns described out loud made me realize I wasn't weak for breaking. I was human for surviving it. People started seeing a different version of me too. Friends told me I seemed lighter, more present. I laughed more easily. I wasn't constantly apologizing for taking up space. It was strange and uncomfortable at first, like wearing clothes that finally fit after years of squeezing into something too small. But over time, it felt right. I still think about my family sometimes. Not with anger, but with a distant sadness. I've accepted that they may never understand what they did, or care to. And that's okay. Closure didn't come from them admitting fault. It came from me choosing myself without needing their permission. The inheritance mattered, yes. The court ruling mattered. But what mattered most was the moment I stopped equating sacrifice with love. I learned that loyalty without boundaries is just self-erasure. That being the responsible one shouldn't mean being the disposable one. I don't look back anymore, not because it doesn't hurt, but because I finally know my worth isn't tied to how much I give away. Walking away wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-respect. And in the end, that was the only inheritance I truly needed.